First of all, can everyone hear me? Can everyone hear me? At the back there, okay. Thank you very much. Great pleasure to be here. The topic is freedom and efficiency, or freedom or efficiency. And what it was sparked off was there's a discussion group, a sort of libertarian discussion group on email. And some years ago, somebody said, referring to some sort of another dictatorship, of course they're dictatorship, but they're so efficient. As if there was some sort of, is either or, either you're free or you're efficient. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Another thing you hear is people say, you can't eat freedom. As a matter of fact, you can. The freest countries have the biggest food crops, so you can eat freedom. If it came to it, if it really was like that, what would you prefer, efficiency or freedom? That would be quite a difficult choice. And for most people on earth, if you said, would you rather be free and hungry or unfree with a full stomach, they'd go for the full stomach. But it doesn't come to that. Quite the opposite. The full stomach goes with the freedom. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. And when I was sort of looking into the subject, I found various problems and paradoxes that I couldn't explain, especially to do with religion. And these are the ones, my conclusion is clear, freedom and efficiency go together, but it's the problems I want to talk about mainly. This is London in the middle of the Blitz. And commentating on that was one of the most perceptive minds of the 20th century, George Orwell. He was there, he was under the bombs. And he then wrote in a book called England, My England, this unbelievable nonsense. What this war has demonstrated, private capitalism does not work. In other words, it's just obvious that the Nazi system is more efficient and therefore we're never going to beat the Nazis. They're horrible. That they're so efficient, we can't beat them. I just want to, by freedom, I'm talking about political freedom, economic freedom, and most difficult of all, religious freedom. That's the one that gives me the most problems. And as well as efficiency, I want to include invention and art, in other words, the creative things. My definition of capitalism. No. Just fine. Just get used to it. It's capitalism is simply an economic system where everyone's free to trade with everybody else. That's capitalism. And this includes two people agreeing on an employment contract. Would you like to work with these conditions? Yes, that's it. Nobody else must interfere. And socialism is an economic system where you're not free to trade as you wish. An elite tells you what conditions you're allowed to do business in. There's two reasons why, this is quite deep, there's two reasons why the elite wants to control business. The first one's the obvious one, they want to loot the business, they want to grab its money. The second one, which is more important, is that they just hate traders. The ruling classes hate people who do business, they hate traders. And it's very ancient and deep, this hatred. This is the more important reason. And here's the extreme example of just how much they hate people doing business amongst themselves, which is the minimum wage. We've now got a minimum wage of $3,500 a month. So what the rich people who drew up this law is saying to, say, a poor unemployed woman, who by the way is likely to be a black woman, they're saying to this woman, we'll let you become a prostitute, no particular fuss against that. You can sell tomatoes at the side of the road for a couple of £100 a month. You can have a child allowance for £340 a month, that's fine. You can starve to death. A bit sorry about that, but not too. But the one thing they will not allow, you're not allowed to work for $3,400 a month. That is immoral. This struggle for capitalism, for free trade, has been going on for about 50,000 years. That's when man became a trading animal. That was the fundamental revolution in our progress. The more capitalism, the more prosperity, especially for poor people. And as you know, poor people always want to move from a socialist country to a capitalist country, and never the other way around. If you have political freedom, you'll always get capitalism, but the other way around isn't true. It doesn't necessarily follow if you have capitalism and get political freedom, and you can see in China right now that's the case. And there was previous examples in Hong Kong and Singapore. No political freedom, extreme economic freedom, and therefore prosperity. Capitalism is efficient. It's a bit like evolution. What works, works. So people say, well, evolution is the survival of the fittest. Well, what do you mean by the fittest? Well, by the fittest you mean those that survive. So you're saying the survival of those that survive. Tautology, and you say, yes, that shows that it's right. Capitalists are free to try everything. They're free to fail or succeed. If they fail, if the fail is discarded, the success is retained. So there's a perpetual movement towards success. It means success means providing people with better goods and services. If you can do that, you survive as a capitalist. Evolution, selection by survival, and capitalism, solution by serving the people. Origins of Western civilization. There's a tendency nowadays to mock Western civilization and run it down. I can say without doubt that it's by far the best civilization in history for all of these reasons here, for tolerance, prosperity, invention, science, everything. Western civilization is superior. An example, a very good example, is slavery. Slavery has been universal in all peoples, all nations, all continents for hundreds of thousands of years. Everyone here has got an ancestor who's a slave or a slave owner. Europe was the first civilization to abolish slavery. The British did this, the Danzig slave trade in the 19th century. The Africans, they were outraged. They're absolutely outraged by this. There was deputations going from West Africa to London. How dare you interfere with our African culture? We've been dealing in slaves for thousands of years, and now you come along with your big gunship, you imperialists, and stop our ancient culture. Slavery, by the way, is an inefficient form of labor. Free workers are far more efficient. That's basically the reason why the North beat the South in the Civil War of America. The beginnings of Western civilization, it began in ancient Greece. And there's a mystery here. Why did civilization first begin in Eurasia, in Europe and in Asia, and not in Africa? Well, we know that quite clearly. It's because civilization begins with farming, always, and you can't have farming without the right geography. And the geography was right in Eurasia, and it wasn't right in Africa. That's the complete explanation for why Africa is less developed than Eurasia. But why in this little country, this little peninsula with a few islands around us in Europe? I don't think anybody knows. There's all sorts of theories, but nobody really knows. The achievements of here is Pericles, who presided over the Golden Age in Greece. Democracy and liberty. Okay, well, it's not complete democracy. Obviously, they had slavery and women didn't have the vote and so forth, but it was the beginning. The sovereignty of the individual wasn't your class or your tribe or anything. It was you the important thing. Terribly important thing, formal comedy. You're formally allowed to laugh at your rulers. There are lots of countries, dictatorships don't allow that. They won't allow laughter. Still today, I think in Zimbabwe there's a law you weren't allowed to make fun of Mugabe. Extraordinary creativity and invention and in the arts, all the arts that you can think of. Philosophy, if you ask almost anybody, name the 4 greatest philosophers who ever lived, 3 of the 4 come from ancient Greece. Then who's the 4th? Well, is it Hume or is it Descartes? That's the difficult one. The first 3 is easy. In almost everything they touched, they're efficient. And when they moved in, when they took over Egypt, they improved Egyptian agriculture and everything. It's most important of all, the scientific method, which I just want to spend a bit of time on. Truth is not revealed. This is the scientific method. Truth must be sought. You must do experiments to find the truth. You must seek the truth, and the search never ends. It never ends. The debate is never over in science. You're taking away my punchline. These 3, religion, magic, and science, form a very complicated triad, very, very complicated, and they swap between themselves. In religion, the truth is revealed. There's the holy book. All truth is in the holy book. And anyone who questions it is a heretic, or what as the climate people call denialist. Denialist and heretic means exactly the same thing. Unquestioning belief. In science, you can only approach the truth by never-ending experiments and observation. Empiricism, questioning is essential. Without questioning, there's no science. You're perpetually skeptical. Magic's a very complicated halfway house. I don't understand it completely. It's very, very complicated. The idea that we always move towards science is wrong. The idea that there's the Enlightenment and from now on man's going to be rational is just completely wrong. In many ways, we're far more irrational in the 20th century than they were in the Middle Ages on lots of scores. We retreat often back to rationalism, back to religion. And obviously, climate change is a spectacular example. It's a religion now. The debate is over. Al Gore has spoken. By the year 2013, no more ice at the Arctic. And you say, well, I don't agree with that. Denialist. You're in the pay of the oil companies. You must just believe what Al Gore says. Ancient Greece pioneered the scientific method despite limitations. I mean, Aristotle, his scientific philosophy was limited, to put it mildly. Right, then Greece fell, and it fell to very different people. Who conquered it then. It was one of these strange things where the less advanced country conquered the more advanced. This has happened once or twice. The Mongols did that. And by the way, the Romans accepted that. They accepted that Greece was a superior civilization. So senior Romans had their children tutored by Greeks. They realized it was a higher civilization, but they were better military. So now, Western civilization, our forefathers were now Romans. And here's Julius Caesar, the founding father of Western civilization. Without him, I don't think we'd have the civilization. So there's 2 things to say about him. First of all, he's the greatest soldier who ever lived. Brilliance, far-sighted, laid the foundations of much of our world today. That's the first thing to say. The second thing to say, he was a monster. He was ferocious, brutal, greedy, and merciless. He slaughtered women and children without hesitation in his campaign in Gaul. People estimate he probably killed 20% of the population of Gaul while he was civilizing it. You can compare him with Genghis Khan. Churchill once said, history will be kind to me because I intend to write it. And Caesar Caesar did that 2,000 years before Churchill. So most of our accounts of the Civil War and of the conquest of Gaul, they come from him. He wrote up the accounts. What a pity we didn't hear from Vercingetorix. He was a genuine French hero. He was assassinated, and then Rome fell into civil war, and the whole history balanced on the results of this battle off the Greek shores in 31 BC. On one side was Cleopatra and Mark Antony, on the other side Octavian and Agrippa. The victor then, who won this battle, at the age of 32, he then inherited the world. And this was Augustus Caesar. Quite a different man. Quite a different man. He was a sickly young man. He was a nothing. He was a useless soldier. He relied completely on his friend Agrippa, who was one of the best soldiers in the world. The only reason he came to power because he was distantly related to Julius Caesar, that's all. The Roman world was on the edge of falling apart as he came to power. At the age of 32, he inherited the Western world, he consolidated it, he secured it, he drew up a plan for government that lasted 400 years in the West, 1,500 years in the East, and to a large extent still exists today. These, if you look carefully, all this writing here is Roman, and it probably wouldn't be without this man. He seems quite a boring chap. He wasn't brilliant, he was unassuming, massive common sense. Common sense can lead you astray, but in politics it's a good thing. He could read people, he knew how to use men, and he wielded power tactfully. His constitutions gave the illusion of democracy and spreading power, gave the trappings of power to people, but real power he kept for himself. And because of him, Roman civilization lasted for centuries, and in the 2nd century AD, Gibbon described it as the period in the history of the world in which the condition of the human race was most happy and prosperous. He was writing in the 18th century, that's different now. But there was a huge problem with Roman civilization, and the problem simply was that it was stagnant. It was a sterile sort of civilization, never developed. The economy was basically a plundering economy where they colonized a country and then they bled it dry with taxes and so forth. That they weren't inventive, quite unlike Greece. They had some good military, good law, so forth and so forth. No science, mathematics, mechanics, philosophy, agriculture never developed very much. Incredible failures. Like in 8 centuries, they didn't invent the stirrup. These are people using horses the whole. They didn't invent the stirrup in 800 years. Why was Greece so inventive and creative and Rome wasn't? And the answer, I don't know. Just don't know. Then came this little part of the world. The Roman Empire fell in the West in about the 5th century. The Dark Ages followed. Apparently the Dark Ages really were dark. Some people say it wasn't that bad. It was that bad. And then civilization developed in 3 parts of the world: Europe, the Middle East, Islam, and China. If you were looking at 1500, saying, well, how would you rate the civilization? You'd say, well, number 1 is China, number 2 is Islam, number 3 is Europe. Quite a bit behind by the year 1500. So then something extraordinary happened. Suddenly, in the last 500 years, Europe just rose to dominate the whole world, completely, in almost every field. Why Europe? Well, there's various theories. That the geographical theory, that Europe was because of the geography, little peninsulas, islands, and so forth. No one ruler could take control of the whole of Europe. So there's competing people, and therefore there's no monopoly on power. There's no stagnant central power as there was in China. That's one theory. The other one, which I find more interesting, mainly because I'm an atheist, I'll come on to this, is Christianity. And here's the reasoning behind it. This is, I find, the biggest problems of all about our development. How did this happen? But it seems like something like this happened. There was this very, very strange development between religion and science and freedom, and often complete lack of freedom with religion led to intellectual freedom in science. And it seems to go something like this. This is probably the greatest Pope, Pope Gregory the 7th. He was 11th century, and I think that's the greatest scientist who had, by the way, a whole lot of funny religious ideas himself. Yeah, but here's my personal. I'm an atheist. I think. Are they too far away to read? Okay, sorry. Okay, I'll just. Okay, I'll. Sorry about that. Here's my. I'm an atheist. I think the universe is an accident, and we're an accident. And so, well, in that case, how do we cope in a meaningless universe? Well, the answer's simple. We invent meaning, and evolution fitted us for meaning. I think as we evolved and became more and more intelligent and had all sorts of doubts about what happens when we die, what causes lightning, we began to get programmed into, selected out with those people who began to have religious belief, and said, well, the meaning is this: when we die, we go to heaven or something like that, and the reason is because God's ordained this and so forth. And these innate beliefs gave us emotional strength. So in other words, religion fitted us for survival. And the great religions, I think, have done good in general, not completely, obviously. They've done far more good than harm. And if you look at the nations that had in their region their own great religion and their own written language, those nations fare completely differently from nations which didn't. So if you look, Europe colonized Africa and parts of Asia, and then they become independent in the 1960s. The Asian ones, their fate has been completely different from African ones, and I believe the reason is the religion and the writing. Can you see the slides at any rate? Are they right? Oh man, that's a pity. You're too far away, that's the trouble. What happened was in the ancient world there's lots and lots of gods.
Can I suggest anybody who can't see this, come to the chairs right up front there.
I don't know why everyone's so. Oh, well, okay. Okay. Say again. Yes, you can get one. Good, yeah. Oh. The ancient world, Greece and Rome, had many, many gods. Here are some of them. They seem quite a good-natured bunch, really. And then the evolution is to one single god. This was not the Jews didn't invent it, but they perfected it. In the ancient world, many gods, you could pick your gods, you could swap them over, you could have more than one, and they were quite tolerant gods. They didn't mind if you had other gods as well. Then in Jerusalem, in the 7th century BC, a small group of people then came with a different concept and changed the whole world. They changed themselves and they changed the whole world. I'll just put all the things up and then explain. This is something like this happened. That's in 586 BC, the Babylonians sacked Jerusalem, burnt down the temple, etc., and sent the Jews into exile in Babylon. Then King Cyrus took over as a Persian, and he's a tolerant guy, and he let the Jews return to Jerusalem. So he had the main lot of Jews stayed there, and this one returning, I think they wanted to show how important they were, and they wanted to explain to the Jews what had gone wrong, why they'd fallen, why Jerusalem had fallen to the Babylonians. So with these two revolutionary concepts, first of all, a written Bible, and it combines actual history, folklore, legends such as the flood, David and Goliath, and so forth, and other religions, Zoroastrianism. It was a work of literary genius. It wasn't completed then. It took centuries to complete it. Profound psychological insight. It inspired people around the world for the next 2006. It's still doing so. Jordan Peterson gives hour-long lectures explaining single stories from the Bible. It looks as if Abraham, Moses, Noah, bondage in Egypt, all probably fictional, but they resonated in the human psyche. They had a deep impression on our thinking. The Bible was full of wars and bloodshed and suffering and revenge and everything like that. Apparently the Romans are horrified by it. All truths lay in the Bible. That's all you need to know is the Bible. And even more important, one God only. Before, the Jews apparently had many gods, and I think Yahweh was just one of them. And now he is the only one. And he's almighty, he's righteous, he's jealous, he's angry, he's got complicated rules. And if you violate those rules, you suffer heavy punishment. The first three commandments out of the 10 are all about the one God. In other words, complete lack of religious feeling. You'd think now, I just said that the truth must be found, not revealed. And here the Jews say the truth revealed. It's all here in this book. And so there's a huge danger. The danger goes like, if you say the first step is all truth's in this book and you need not look anywhere else. The next one is all truth's in this book and you must not look anywhere else. The next one's all truth is in this book, and if you print a book with other truths, it will burn the book. And the final step is if you print a book with other truths, it will burn you. And this is what happened down the ages with Christianity. I don't think with Judaism. So you would think, very well then, this Bible is going to stunt the Jewish intellect. It did quite the opposite. It caused a massive increase in Jewish literacy, learning, scholarship, high status for scholars and scribes. Any civilization that has high status for scholars and scribes is going to advance. It's going to advance in learning and discovery. There's a massive increase in Jewish invention ideas. It's maybe the Ashkenazi Jews have the highest IQs on earth, been shown over and over and again. Anyone who's been to university, the Jews are this much percent of the student body and that much percent of the prize winners, wherever you go. I think the reason for this high IQ and the reason for why they excel in all of these things is because of what these guys did in the 7th century with their Bible and their single God. And it's a huge paradox. And in the World War II, which I'm going to come on to, is spectacularly demonstrated. And of course, the Bible led directly to Christianity and to Islam. Christianity is a sort of offshoot of Judaism. Christianity became the official Roman religion in 313. It had bad effects. It had shut down learning, there's religious intolerance, denial of medical science and Greek learning. The gymnasia were shut down. But the church, the formal church, the Roman Catholic Church, I was brought up as a Catholic, and they said, you mustn't say Roman Catholic, just say Catholic. But actually, Roman Catholic is more accurate. They inherited the organization of Rome. So they had a network of centers and administration all over Europe. The church took these over, and these became monasteries and theological colleges, communicating with each other. They began teaching theology, but then they turned to science, and they became universities. Oxford and Cambridge began teaching theology. So Christianity funded science. This is the fundamental thing. Peter Watson, a historian, he was asked to name the most important man of ideas in the history of the world. The most important man of ideas in the history of the world. He thought a bit, and he named this man. He said this man, Robert Grotesque, however you pronounce it, who was a bishop of Lincoln, was the founder of scientific thoughts in medieval Oxford and then the world. Okay, well, in that case, if so, then why was Islam still conquering Christianity when Constantinople fell? Well, it looks as if the seeds of science and discovery, everything planted in the 11th century, took a long time to grow. And by this stage, they were almost there, but not quite there. And from then on, it just took over. I must hurry up. Right, now here's a big argument with Skulk. To me, this is the biggest paradox of all. This man here, John Calvin. So the Reformation began with Luther against the corruption of the Catholic Church. He was a passionate, sort of excitable guy, but this guy wasn't, this cold-blooded guy. And this is what I believe. He proposed the doctrine of despair, of predestination. We're doomed at birth. At birth, some are going to go to heaven, some are going to hell, regardless of what they do. Skulk says I'm wrong. Okay, well, I'd like to hear about that. You would think that this doctrine would produce passive people. It produced quite the opposite. The Calvinists were the most enterprising, optimistic, self-reliant people. These were the people of the Protestant ethic in North America. Why did North America do so much better than South America? One explanation is because the North was Protestant and the South was Catholic. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. And this man here is responsible for that. So would you call him, why did his philosophy lead to a completely different outcome? I really don't know. But I can see Skulk is going to explain afterwards. Is this man the patron saint of capitalism? Calvin. Anyway, then, so capitalism, I must hurry up. Capitalism expanded better and better and better until the 20th century. The 20th century saw the greatest clash of ideologies of all time. And here are the four symbols, the four most important symbols of freedom and unfreedom in the 20th century. On the side of tyranny, the hammer and sickle, and the swastika, closely related, a little bit different. And on the side of freedom, Coca-Cola and Mickey Mouse. Those are the important symbols of the 20th century. It also explains, by the way, this is capitalism, because freedom is capitalism. It also explains why socialists hate capitalism too much, because this is precisely what people want. They want this sort of thing, they want these two things, and socialists hate giving people what they want. What they want is giving people what they should have. Capitalism, had one problem, which was the the crash of 1929, which was a bit of a bubble. If they'd just done nothing, left it alone, don't mess with the money supply, don't impose these terrible laws against trade, it would have got over and we'd have been better than ever. Instead, they stopped the money supply, they stopped trade and so forth, and this caused massive unemployment everywhere in the world, with one exception, which was National Socialist Germany. And can you read this now? Can you read this? So the communists, there was a genuine revolution in Russia in February in 17 because of the First World War. And then there was a bourgeois coup, nothing to do with the popular uprising, nothing to do with the working classes. A little group led by Lenin took over. And for the next 72 years, Russia was ruled by communism. All freedom was stamped out. What effect did that have on efficiency? Sorry, I'll have to. Lenin never got popular support, didn't want it. He was the inspiration for Stalin and Hitler. What freedom there was in Tsarist Russia, he stamped it out, and he was staggeringly inefficient. You had crop failures, reduced industrial production, crumbling infrastructure, the health system. You hear the climate alarmists say malaria is going to come, rising temperatures, and we need socialism. Well, in Archangel, in the north of Russia, they had very cold temperatures, and they had socialism, and they had the biggest malaria outbreak of all time. Here's the proof. They could see in front of their eyes that socialism was failing. There was famines caused by collective farming. So then Lenin, who was a clever guy, the new economic policy in 1922 was to allow a bit of capitalism back into farming, a bit of a market for farming. And the result was food production was going like that. They brought capitalism back and it went like that, the famine over. So it was absolutely clear to them that it was inefficient, but nonetheless, when Stalin took over, he was now strong enough, had enough terror to survive massive famines, which is what he did. He did, it's true, succeeded in industrializing using slave labor on a massive scale. And then a National Socialism. Hitler, he was the biggest party in Germany, but never got an outright majority. There's some big deal down at the end of 1932, and on the 30th of January he came to power with 3 ministries. That's all he needed. He just took over immediately, ended all democracy, banned other parties, ended political freedom, took over the institutions of the states, and established National Socialist tyranny exactly as he said he would. He said he was going to wipe out democracy, and when he came to power, he did. Yeah. The differences between communism and Nazism, there are 2 forms of extreme socialism. They're Tweedledum and Tweedledee. But the 2 different differences are communism believes in class warfare, socialism believes in race warfare. In the economy, communism said party officials must run the economy. And in Nazism, capitalists run the economy under the control of the Nazi party. And what Hitler said, I can't recall the quotation, he said, communism wants to nationalize the economy and we want to nationalize the people, which I think is a pretty accurate summary of his intentions. And this is the reason why the Nazi economy did so much better than the Hitler himself. He was responsible for the worst crime in history. It's true that Stalin and Mao killed more people than Hitler, that's true. But the Holocaust, by its nature, I think is the worst crime in history. He was a political genius, there's no question of that. He's one of the great men as a man who changed history, probably the great man of the 20th century. Monstrous willpower. He was a brilliant orator, showman, designer, organizer. He had huge talents. He wasn't bad on military strategy, not bad at all. He used rational means to achieve irrational ends. Personally, I think he's a very lonely man. You speak to people with him in the trenches. He's quite a sad man, pathetic man. He was sexless. One of a Nazi wife of a general who met him said afterwards, he said, "I tell you that man's a nooser," which I'm sure is true. He sought belonging in the nation. So when he got into power, brought a tremendous sense of community to Germany. There's all sorts of societies and open-air stuff, and the women and the youth and everything, all together, all Germans happily together, except, of course, for the Jews and the wrong one. From 1924 to 1941, he didn't put a foot wrong. He played every card like a master. You must realize he was a complete and extreme socialist. He hated capitalism. He deliberately named his party the German National Social Workers' Party. That was his name. He was a vegetarian, non-smoker, teetotaler, virgin, and animal lover. And I'm with him on 3 of the 5. Cheers. Here's a very interesting thing. This is a bit of a whimsy now. I'm going to play a song now. The Nazis were great at propaganda. They're great at propaganda. Their marches, their parades, licensed sound, they invented these. The revolutionary new camera work under Lena Riefenstahl, these great rallies. But the best Nazi song I've ever heard, I'm going to play it to you now. This is the best Nazi song I've ever heard, best political song I've ever heard. In 3 minutes, just imagine you've got 3 minutes now without a word of politics to explain the whole Nazi message to ordinary people, including quite stupid people. You've not only got to explain the message, you've got to inspire these people why you should follow Hitler. Okay, this is now Germany, somewhere in the countryside in 1931, about 18 months before the Nazis came to power. And I'm just warning you, last 3 minutes only, it's quite a frightening scene. Can you turn the volume up full?
To Africa. To Africa.
Somewhere a glory awaits unseen. Tomorrow belongs to me. My babe in his cradle is closing his eyes. The last embraces of me. But soon there's a western
Well, the song made a huge impression on me, and I wondered where it came from. So I thought, was this the Horst Wessel song? No, it wasn't that. So I finally discovered where the song came from and who wrote it. It was written in 1966 by two New York Jews, both homosexual. And why did they write it? Well, they wrote it for the film, they wrote it for the money. In other words, capitalism can produce better Nazi propaganda than the Nazis can, if the price is right. By the way, there's, I don't know if there's sort of homosexual suggestions in the scene. The homosexuality was very prevalent amongst the leading Nazis. They're open about it. The generals slept with pretty young boys and so forth. I don't know if there's some sort of reference to it, I'm not sure. Okay, the Nazi economy, as Hitler came to power, Germany had a massive economy that wasn't working. Highly developed economy, the world's most skilled, disciplined people, huge industrial capital lying stagnant. It's like a massive pump waiting to be primed. And Hitler knew nothing about economics, not interested. He primed the pump with colossal investment in armaments. He brought certainty and order. There's no more political strife anymore. I'm in charge. You know where you stand, and capitalists like certainty. And he had the most brilliant finance minister who I don't understand. I'll bring him up. He had the most brilliant finance minister, Schacht. This is this guy here, who did all sorts of things, different exchange rates and bargains. I don't know what he was doing, but it seemed to work. How much longer would it have worked without the war? I really don't know. Now, what about efficiency? Just say some disturbing things about. I've spoken to people who were there at the time, including my father. So my father, he was Scottish. I was born in Scotland too. He was born 1912. All of his life he was a Labour supporter. In 1945 he voted Labour. He voted to kick out Churchill. He was on the third mate of a Scottish merchant ship, and he entered Hamburg in 1935. This is about almost 2 years after Hitler had been there. As I say, he was hardcore Labour supporter. And I said, what was it like there? He said, buoyant, full of life, full of enthusiasm. Everyone was on the move and up with the Führer. A distant relation of mine, she was working in a factory, and they had to stop and they listened to Hitler's speeches coming out of the microphone. What did you think of them? A1. She thought they were great. Her son was highly qualified in something, and he was nearly 30 and he never had a job in his whole life. Within months of Hitler coming to power, he got a job. So, Ein Reich, ein Volk, ein Führer. There's no doubt that Hitler was very popular, no doubt at all. And there's two huge problems about this. The first problem is that he destroyed all freedom, and people didn't seem to care very much. The newspapers became a Nazi broadsheets which nobody read, and they didn't care. They didn't care that the radio was boring and everything. They didn't care. They watched soccer instead. It didn't bother most people. And far worse, nobody protested, very few people protested against the persecution of the Jews, which is right from before the beginning. He said he was going to persecute them, and he did in his opening speech. Right from the word go, they persecuted. What did ordinary people do about this? Nothing. And if you say, well, the Germans are different, the Germans aren't different. In other countries that they occupied, the people behaved in the same way. And I'm afraid most of us would behave in the same way, I regret to say, which makes you sympathize with Jewish fears and maybe even Jewish aggression such as Israel. Just to show you a little, for those of you who haven't seen the man himself, let me just... sorry. I'm just going to show you a short extract from one of his speeches. He's speaking to some sort of youth parade. slow, man.
Und ihr müsst euch in dem Gehorsam üben. Wir wollen, dass dieses Volk ein friedliebend und aber auch tapfer ist. Und ihr müsst friedfertig sein.
Why isn't it? There it is. Sorry.
Deshalb friedfertig sein und mutig zugleich. Wir wollen, dass dieses Volk einst nicht verweichlicht wird, sondern dass es hart sein kann. Und ihr müsst euch in der Jugend dafür stehlen. Ihr müsst lernen, Entbehrungen auf euch zu nehmen, ohne jeweils zusammenzubrechen. Denn was wir auch heute schaffen und was wir tun, wir werden vergehen, aber in euch wird Deutschland weiterleben. Und wenn von uns nichts mehr übrig sein wird, dann werdet ihr die Fahne, die wir einst auf dem Licht hochgezogen haben, in euren Fäusten halten müssen. Und ich weiß, das kann nicht anders sein, denn ihr seid Fleisch, von unserem Fleisch und Blut, von unserem Blut, und in euren jungen Gehirnen brennt derselbe Geist, der uns beherrscht. Ihr könnt nicht anders sein, als mit uns verbunden. Und wenn die großen
I think we've had enough. Just switch him off. I think that's enough of that. Just to give a flavour. I mean, that was the man. That adulation in the crowd, I think, is to a large extent genuine. It's not stage rigged. That applause, that enthusiasm for him was genuine. That's a big problem. Okay, and now the next one, yeah. You can't just go and play. We're just advanced now. Oh man.
I need a quick switch restart.
Sorry?
Because you had it working a moment ago, but when you restarted it, remember? I suppose a lot of slice goes.
Here we are.
Okay.
So sorry about that. So the big question is, were the Nazis efficient? were the Nazis efficient? This thing about, well, there certainly were very efficient Nazi companies, but German companies have been efficient long before Hitler came in. He didn't make them more efficient. Often the government administration was a complete shambles, totally inefficient. You had no cooperation between the different departments. They often at war with each other deliberately because of Hitler. The 5-year plan didn't work at all. The central planned economy didn't work at all. Even the armaments industry didn't work very well. They did succeed in rearming on a huge scale, but it wasn't very efficiently done. The big success was to bring down unemployment. They weren't very efficient. Right, now coming to the rest is about the Second World War. This is the ultimate test of, I hate to say it, of efficiency and invention. War, a lot of inventions are because of war. And here's Hitler's absolute highlight, entering Paris in June 1940. Now, I'm sorry you can't read this, but this is from George Orwell. George Orwell writing in The Lion and the Unicorn. As I write, highly civilized human beings are flying overhead trying to kill me. This war has demonstrated private capitalism cannot work. However horrible the system is, Nazism, it works. And this sentence here said, the capitalist countries are incapable of building a good bombing aeroplane. The capitalist countries can't build a good bomber aeroplane. They'll never be able to bomb Germany. Just remember that thought. Just amusing what might have happened. I'm going to skip through this. This is amusing. I'm behind time. Let me carry on. The most invention, take invention first. The 4 most important inventions of World War II. I'll tell you, they were radar, the proximity fuse, code cracking, and the atomic bomb. 4 out of 4 were from the free countries. So first of all, radar. The British didn't invent radar, but they greatly improved in the Second World War. The frequency increased, had far more resolution, and they were devastatingly effective against the German Army, Air Force, everything. Here's the example. They tracked down the Bismarck because of radar and then sunk it. Proximity fuse. This was a thing that won the war. The Japanese had this very good airplane, the Zero. This was Pearl Harbor. It was very fast, it was agile, it was a good fighter, but it was quite light and flimsy. So if you hit this with almost anything, you knock it down. Trouble is, it's very, very difficult to hit. So at the beginning of the war, the Americans were trying to shoot this thing down and didn't do very well at all. And then quite suddenly, they just began blasting them out of the sky. Well, how did they do that? Did their aim improve? No, their aim didn't improve. The Japanese are absolutely flummoxed by this. They're using a proximity fuse. Oh, come on, man. Jesus, man. The proximity. Okay, proximity fuse. Okay, I'll do that. Okay, thanks. Is it this one?
Yeah, it's down. No. Yeah, no, down. Now there.
Okay. Okay. Jesus, man. Sorry about this. Will you do it for me? Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks. The proximity fuse. Carry on.
It shows on here but doesn't go there. Good.
Okay, but the proximity fuse, what it was is, if the shell, which is an explosive shell, previously the shell had to hit the target to explode. In this case, it got somewhere near the target, it exploded. So if you get within 5 meters of the target, or 10 meters of the target, this thing exploded. Okay, can you keep changing for me now? This thing exploded. So one of those little pieces of shrapnel is enough to bring down a zero, and that's what happened. Okay, carry on. Code breaking. This is the Battle of Kursk, the biggest tank battle in the war. Carry on. Crushing Russian victory. What happened was, okay, stop there. What happened was the Germans planned this big last push to beat the Russians, massive attack. And as they came over the hill, the Russians were waiting for them in secure positions, waiting for them. And they thought, for God's sake, what's happened? It's almost as if Kursk, Zhukov, has been reading the German orders, and that's what he had been doing, because the British had intercepted the German orders, deciphered them, and handed them over to Zhukov. And he then won that battle and eventually won the war. How did the British do that? Carry on. Carry on, carry on, carry on. Carry on. The Germans had something called, carry on. Carry on.
I'm trying to.
The Germans had something called an Enigma machine that they said, you cannot crack this machine. I would have agreed with them, you can't do that. So at Bletchley Park, which is there, they assembled the British, these bunch of mathematical, brilliant people, including geniuses, I think, of who the two most famous was Alan Turing and Gordon Welshman, and they cracked the codes. They cracked the codes. So as the German orders were going out, the British were reading them. They knew exactly what the Germans were going to do. But unfortunately, there was a tragedy here. Carry on. Carry on. Okay, stop. These two, this man here, Turing, who's very famous, the mathematician will know him, he cracked the codes. He was a genius. He had made other marks in mathematics. I've got a friend who met him. He's a shy, gentle, modest, he was homosexual. Shy, hell of a decent guy. After the war, he's prosecuted for the crime of homosexuality. He was forced to castrate himself chemically, and he killed himself. I mean, not only is this a moral atrocity, but it's so ridiculous, because both Hitler and Churchill fully accepted homosexuality. They made jokes about it. They knew it was going on all over their armies and all over the country. Next one. This guy is quite different, Gordon Welshman. He was a ladies' man, outgoing and so forth, but brilliant minds, and he also helped to crack the codes. Probably as big a part as Turing, but he felt he wasn't recognized. And a long time after the war, he wrote a book about it, and he was ostracized and I think condemned and lost his job, and he was in shame forevermore. Okay? Let's hurry up now, sorry.
5 minutes to go.
Oh, okay, well, just hurry. Okay, let's go quickly. Go.
No, that's right.
Okay, fine, stop there. Okay, the atomic bomb obviously it ended the war. Killed about 200,000 people with horrible deaths. Not from the radiation, which reminded me, it was the heat, it was the terrible heat. People got bride alive. So the front of their body would be cooked, intestines fall out, but the back of the body was untouched. The terrible flash of heat. It saved, I reckon, at least 20 million lives. If they'd had to invade Japan, it would have made D-Day look like a picnic. It would have been a nightmare. And this bomb stopped that thing happening. Gave us the best form of electricity supply that we know. And there's Kubik there. Carry on. I'll tell you when it's coming. But I just need the pictures. It's very important to me.
I restarted it. Because there was 3 running in the background.
Yeah, well,
And that was the problem.
Oh, here we are. If that comes up, if you can bring that up, that's what it is.
That's what I'm...
yeah. There you go.
Okay. Can I do it now?
Well, I just want to see if it works. Go. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, thanks.
Okay. George, I already gave numbers through. George. Die klaar was dit. Ja, goed.
Okay. Okay, just the making of the atomic bomb. This was this comes in 2 parts, both of which needed complete freedom. First of all, the scientific discovery. Probably the world's greatest assembly of scientists from all around the world, many Jews. I want to say more about this, including some of the cleverest men who ever lived, including maybe the cleverest man who ever lived, which was John von Neumann. They explored completely different ideas in physics. Nothing like that had been looked at or attempted before. I think this is only possible with complete freedom. The Nazis would have banned it as Jewish science. The communists would have banned it as bourgeois science. Only free countries, I believe, could have come up with this thinking. Then, to produce the thing, you needed massively new production methods. And I think only capitalism could have produced these things so quickly. Here are 4 of the great scientists who produced this. Enrico Fermi, he was the first person to get a chain reaction going. Von Neumann, as I say, maybe the cleverest person of all time, enormous amount of work on the implosion bomb. There is Robert Oppenheimer, who was who led the team, and there's Einstein, whose ideas started the whole thing. But here's the thing, I'm not being racist or anything. Remember what I said about the Jews in the 7th century, this thing making them intellectual and high IQ. Well, here are just 4 of the people working on the bomb: Italian Jew, Hungarian Jew, American Jew, German Jew. And I'd say it's down to those guys in the 7th century. Okay, just going through most effective things very quickly. Most effective gun in the Second World War was a German gun, the 88mm cannon. Most effective tank was a Russian tank, was the T-34. It was reliable, it was strong enough, it was good enough. It wasn't the strongest of all, which was the German Tiger. But the German Tiger was nearly always broken down. You couldn't get it there. It's the most effective. You know R.W. Johnston, the writer? His father-in-law was on the design team of this. Yeah. Okay, let me just. I'm finished. Okay, just the last one. This is. Let me finish off here. George Orwell was saying, capitalist countries can't make a bombing aeroplane. The capitalists, the Americans, and the British can't make a bomber. This is 1944 in the sky above Germany. Those signs there, the signs of the United States. And there's Dresden, laid low by something that all said they couldn't produce. Most effective fighting force in the Second World War was the German army. for reasons that are quite difficult. Somehow now that seems Hitler did inspire them. He made them democratic, which seems a paradox. They were the best fighting force in the war, and the only reason they lost is because they weren't well supplied and they had bad logistics. I'm just going to hurry through now. The most effective general was Zhukov, who was a Russian. The most effective political leader was Winston Churchill. Very, very important, the most effective suppliers and logistics was the Americans. This aeroplane, this ship, this jeep, these were the things that really swung the war for the Americans. This the Americans could do with enormous efficiency, far more so than anybody else. This is what won the war for them, efficiency. The cooperation was much better between the capitalist countries than the socialist countries. All of them worked together, they exchanged leaders, they exchanged weapons, they coordinated on weapons, whereas Italy, Germany, and Japan didn't speak to each other. They wouldn't have each other's leaders. They kept each other in the dock, no cooperation whatsoever. Capitalists cooperate better than socialists. The final showdown, okay, was between, that's the final showdown there, and if you believe the propaganda, you know, this was what should have happened. Nazi Germany, blood and iron, disciplined, virile, efficient, selfless, serving a higher cause. America, bubblegum, decadence, inefficient, fun-loving, individual comes first, and the result was that America absolutely pulverized them. Last slide. So there you have the results. Nazi Germany versus the USA, the most formidable socialist state versus the most formidable capitalist state, with a crushing victory for capitalism. The USA, is true that they had right on their side, but right doesn't win wars. What wins wars is efficiency. And not that the Americans beat Nazi Germany, they pulverized them. And they did so because of the overwhelmingly great efficiency of capitalism, and that's it for me.
Okay, so we're only going to allow 3 questions. Unfortunately, we are running a bit low. By the way, the electricity is still on, so that's good news.
You're using my machine.
Yes, please.
Andrew, here I am over here. Very short question. Although I agree with most of your analysis, would you comment on the Vietnam War and the efficiency of capitalism?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. You say when the Americans intervened in the Second World War, they did very well. So they conquered Germany and they conquered Japan, and they restored both to prosperity and democracy. I think the Vietnam War was a very stupid affair, begun by Kennedy, all the wrong reasons. I think that Ho Chi Minh, he was a nationalist more than a communist. He just took communist as a suitable sort of label, gets support from the Russians and so forth. I think the war was a mistake in the first place, and they went in with one hand tied behind their back. Obviously, they could have beaten the Vietnamese, but at a high cost. I think it was a stupid war. They weren't very efficient in that war. No, that was I agree, and the same thing in Iraq nowadays.
Is your point that the inefficiency of Germany was covered, or they hid their inefficiencies by taking advantage of other people's technology? But are we also not forgetting that the First World War, prior to that First World War, Germany was one of, if not the most industrialized nation. So what they were doing to compensate, they were doing because they had been destroyed after the First World War.
So I didn't quite get just. Okay. Of course, when you're efficient, you take over the best technology there is from wherever it comes. whoever's got the best technology, you just adopt that as your own. And that's what the capitalist countries do. As I say, in the First World War, Germany had, you know, great army and great military school and so forth. In the Second World War, they had those things too, and they had the disadvantage of National Socialism in certain ways, which made, for example, the invasion of Russia extremely inefficient. But they had the slight advantage, funny enough, in the army. Hitler managed to make that more efficient, which is a bit more mysterious.
Thank you very much. Let's give it